She was just trying to calm a very scared little girl with soap bubbles in her empty diner at 3 a.m. What the waitress didn't know is that the child's father, watching from the dark, was the strongest vampire king alive, and he just decided she belonged to him. The clock above Mel's diner read 2:47 a.m. when Emma Rodriguez wiped down the same coffee stand counter for the third time that hour. Rain hit the windows of the diner hard, and the bright lights flickered like fireflies dying out. Only two customers remained. Old Frank sipping his black coffee at table 6, and a truck driver named Billy who had been staring at his whole pie for 20 minutes. Emma tucked a piece of duck hair behind her ear and sighed. 3 years of late shifts on this lonely road between nowhere and nowhere, and she still couldn't get used to how strange and quiet it was after midnight. The diner felt like a boat floating in an ocean of darkness, with only the bright lights of a huge truck sometimes cutting through the gloom. She was reaching for the coffee pot when the front door burst open. A small figure fell inside, completely wet and shaking very badly like a leaf in the wind. Emma's breath stopped in her throat. It was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with very blonde hair stuck to her pale face. Her clothes, a white dress that looked costly even though it was torn and muddy, stuck to her tiny body. But it was her eyes that made Emma's heart skip a beat. They were the lightest blue she'd ever seen, almost silver, and filled with a fear so deep it seemed very old. The girl stood in the doorway, water gathering at her bare feet, not making a sound, just staring. Frank's coffee cup hit the saucer loudly. Jesus Christ, where'd she come from? Billy pushed back from his table, his chair scratching against the floor. Kid looks almost dead. Should we call someone? Emma moved around the counter slowly, like she would go toward an injured animal. Something about the child made her skin feel uneasy, but not scared. She felt a need to protect the girl. The girl's lips were slightly blue, and her small hands shook as they held onto her dress. "Hey there, sweetie," Emma said softly, kneeling down to look the girl in the eye. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" The child's silver eyes looked straight into Emma's brown ones, but she didn't speak, didn't even seem to take a breath. "Where are your parents, honey?" Emma tried again, reaching out slowly. "Did someone hurt you?" The moment Emma's fingers touched the girl's ice-cold hand, the child jumped back hard and made a sound that made everyone in the diner freeze. It wasn't quite a scream. It was something very loud and painful, like a hurt animal stuck in a trap. The bright lights above them flickered even harder, and Frank's coffee mug broke on the floor. "What the heck?" Billy started, but Emma gave him a sharp look. The girl's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out, only that terrible, silent cry of fear. Her whole body shook now, and Emma realized with growing worry that the child was having some kind of panic attack. Emma's mind raced. She'd seen bad feelings before. Her younger brother had panic attacks after their father left. But this felt different, deeper, like the girl had seen something that no child should ever see. Without thinking, Emma reached into her apron pocket and pulled out something that had helped her through many late-night shifts when she was so bored she felt crazy. A small bottle of bubble soap with a tiny stick attached to the cap. "Look at this, baby girl," Emma whispered, opening the bottle. "Watch." She dipped the plastic stick into the soapy liquid and blew softly. A line of rainbow-colored bubbles floated through the air, catching the diner's harsh light and making it look like something magical. They floated around the girl's face like small, shiny planets, popping softly against her cheeks and hair. The change was instant and amazing. The girl's fast breathing slowed down, her silver eyes grew wider with wonder instead of terror, and she lifted one shaking hand to touch a bubble before it burst against her palm. A faint smile crossed her lips, the first sign of a normal person Emma had seen from her. "Pretty, aren't they?" Emma blew another group, and the girl actually stepped closer, her bare feet quiet on the wet floor. "My mom used to make these for me when I was scared. They carried wishes up to heaven." The girl reached for more bubbles, her movements becoming less shaky, more like a child. She was still pale as moonlight and cold as winter, but the deep fear had left her eyes. Emma kept blowing bubbles, creating a small cloud of shiny balls that seemed to glow in the diner's dim light. That's when the temperature suddenly dropped 20 degrees. Emma's breath looked like mist in front of her face. The windows became completely fogged, and every single light in the diner flickered, once, twice, then went out completely. Emergency lighting turned on, covering everything in a scary red glow that made the whole place look like the inside of a beating heart. Frank was standing up, trying to find his phone. "Power line must have gone down in the storm." "No." Billy's voice was barely a whisper. He was staring at the front windows, his face white as paper. "Look outside." Emma followed his gaze and felt her blood turn very cold. Through the rain-covered glass, she could see shapes moving in the parking lot. Not cars, people. At least a dozen of them standing perfectly still in the heavy rain like statues. They were dark clothes that seemed to soak up the little light that was left. And they didn't move like normal people move. They were too smooth, too quiet, like hunters who'd never known what it felt like to be caught. And they were all facing the diner. The little girl beside Emma became stiff. She grabbed Emma's hand with fingers like ice, and when Emma looked down, the child's silver eyes had turned completely white. No black center, no color, just blank, terrified white. The front door opened with a soft bell sound that seemed sad in the silence. A man stepped inside, and Emma's heart almost stopped beating at all. He had to be at least 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders wide enough to block out the emergency light behind him. His hair was black as midnight and pulled back from a face that looked like it had been perfectly shaped from stone by a master artist, all sharp angles and perfect beauty that belonged in a museum, not a roadside diner. But it was his eyes that made Emma's heart skip a beat. They were the lightest blue she'd ever seen, almost silver, and filled with a fear so deep it seemed very old. He wore a long black coat that looked like it cost more than Emma made in 6 months, and it didn't have a single drop of rain on it, even with the big storm outside. When he moved, it was with the smooth, hunting grace she had seen in the shapes outside the windows, like gravity didn't pull on him the same way it did everyone else. The man's silver gaze looked across the diner, seeing Frank hiding by his table, Billy pushed against the back wall, and finally stopping on Emma and the little girl. When his eyes locked onto Emma, she felt something change in the air around them, like the moment before lightning strikes. "Who?" he asked, carrying a slight way of speaking she couldn't guess, and a coldness that made the temperature drop another 10 degrees. "Has been touching my daughter." Silence fell on the diner like a heavy blanket that choked them. Emma could hear her own heartbeat loudly in her ears, and she could feel the little girl's icy fingers holding tightly to her hand with desperate strength. Frank had become so pale he looked like he might faint, while Billy pushed himself further against the wall as if he could somehow melt into it. The man, this person who called himself the child's father, stood in the doorway like a dark angel of death. Behind him, Emma could see more figures quietly walking into the parking lot. They moved with that same strange, smooth way, spreading out to surround the building like game pieces on a board. Every way out, every escape route was being blocked completely. Emma's mouth went dry. Whatever these people were, they weren't human. The way they moved, the way the temperature kept dropping, the way the air itself seemed to move around them, it was wrong in ways her mind couldn't fully understand. "I asked a question," the man said, stepping further into the diner. His boots made no sound on the floor. "And I expect an answer." His silver eyes looked over Frank, who immediately pointed a shaking finger at Emma. "Her. She's the one who was talking to the kid." "Frank!" Emma gasped, but she couldn't blame him. Fear had a way of turning people into cowards. The man's attention focused on Emma like a powerful light beam, and she felt open, unprotected, as if he could see straight through to her soul. Those old eyes noticed everything: her messy uniform, her working hands, the way she quickly moved to hide the little girl behind her. "You touched what belongs to me," he said, his voice soft as expensive cloth and twice as dangerous. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Emma's fear grew fast, but underneath it, anger began to burn. This child had been very scared, alone, soaking wet in the middle of the night. What kind of father let that happen? "She was scared," Emma said, her voice shaking but firm. "She was just a little girl who needed help. I wasn't going to hurt her." Something quickly crossed the man's perfect face. Surprise, maybe? That she'd found the bravery to speak at all. Help? The word came out like he'd never heard it before. "You think you were helping her? Look at her." Emma's need to protect the girl was stronger than her fear. "She's terrified. She's freezing. She can't even speak. What was I supposed to do? Just ignore her?" The man took another step closer, and Emma could smell something on him. Not perfume, but something wilder, more animal-like, like winter forests and old blood. "You have no idea what she is, what I am. You've gotten in the way of powers you can't understand, little human." Human? The way he said it made Emma's skin crawl, like she was a different kind of animal completely. "I don't care what you are," Emma said, surprising herself with how brave she was. "She's just a child." That's when the little girl did something that shocked everyone in the room, including her father. She let go of Emma's hand and stepped forward, wrapping her small arms around Emma's leg in a tight hug. Her silver eyes, no longer blank with terror, looked up at Emma with something that might have been thankfulness or love, or both. The man froze. For the first time since he'd entered the diner, his calm face broke. Emma watched feelings quickly cross his stone-like face. Confusion, shock, and something that might have been wonder. Lyra. His voice was different now, softer, almost gentle. Daughter. The little girl, Lyra, turned to look at her father, but she didn't let go of Emma's leg. Instead, she reached out with one small hand, making a sign Emma didn't understand, but that clearly meant something to him. The man's silver eyes grew wide. He took a step back, then another, as if his daughter had physically pushed him. That's impossible. What? Emma asked sternly, looking down at Lyra, who was now holding on to her with both arms. What's impossible? The man stared at his daughter for a long moment, something changing in those ancient eyes. When he looked back at Emma, the deadly coldness was still there, but underneath it was something else. Interest, perhaps, or a plan. She hasn't spoken to anyone in 3 years, hasn't touched anyone, hasn't trusted anyone. His gaze stayed on Emma's face with new focus. Until you. Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the strange cold filling the diner. What are you talking about? Instead of answering, Kale stepped closer, and Emma could see her own reflection in his silver eyes. What's your name, human? Emma, she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. Emma, he said her name like he was testing its taste. You will come with me. What? No. Emma tried to step back, but Lyra's arms around her leg held her in place. I can't just leave. I have a job. I have a life. You have nothing, he said with complete certainty. No family, no real friends, no one who would miss you if you disappeared tonight. His smile was sharp as a knife. Don't look so shocked. I know everything about everyone in this sad little town. Emma's blood ran cold, because he was right, completely, terribly right. My daughter has chosen you. Therefore, you will come with me. You will care for her. You will give her whatever comfort she seems to find in your presence. And if I refuse? His smile became something truly frightening. All hunter, no human feeling. Then you won't live to regret the decision. Before Emma could argue more, Lyra tugged on her hand and pointed toward the door. The little girl's silver eyes held a plea that Emma couldn't ignore, even if she wanted to. The man made a sign, and 2 of his helpers entered the diner. They moved like shadows, standing on either side of Emma, but not quite touching her. Gentlemen, escort our guests to the car. Wait! Emma tried to pull away, but Lyra held tight to her hand. I don't even know who you are! The man stopped at the door, his black coat flowing around him like wings. When he turned back, his smile was all sharp edges and old power. Lord Kale Draven, and you, Emma Rodriguez, are about to discover that your simple little life has just become much, much harder. The last thing Emma saw as she was rushed out into the storm was Frank and Billy's scared faces watching through the foggy windows. And then she was being led toward a shiny, black car that looked like it belonged in a movie about spies. The night swallowed them whole. The car ride felt like going down into a nightmare. Emma sat in the back seat between 2 of Kale's men, their presence as cold and heavy as tombstones. They didn't breathe. She was sure of it. She'd been watching for 20 minutes, and neither of their chests had gone up or down. Lyra sat across from me, next to Kale, those silver eyes never looking at Emma's face, as if she feared Emma might disappear if she looked away. The land outside the dark windows grew wilder and emptier with each mile they drove. They'd left the main road far behind, driving through roads that became narrower and seemed cut from the darkness itself. Old trees stood close on either side, their twisted branches creating a cover so thick that even the storm's lightning couldn't get through. Where are you taking me? Emma finally managed to whisper. Kale didn't look up from the small computer he had been reading. Home. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. Emma stopped herself from talking back. Every feeling screamed at her to run. But where could she go? Even if she could somehow escape these strange people, she was lost in the middle of nowhere with no phone, no car, and no idea which way led back to regular life. After what felt like hours, the trees finally split open to show something that made Emma gasp. The Draven Estate rose from the land like a massive church built by dark angels. It was huge, easily the size of a small hotel, with tall, pointed towers that went up into the storm clouds above. Every window shone with golden light, but instead of looking welcoming, it looked like the eyes of some great monster watching their approach.
Stone figures sat on the corners of the building, their stone faces twisted in silent screams. Jesus, Emma breathed. He has no power here, Kale said without looking up. The car pulled up to a circular driveway made of black stone that reflected the lightning like shining black glass. As soon as the engine died, figures began coming out from the estate's front door. They moved at the exact same time, forming two lines that led to the huge front doors. Servants, Kale explained, finally putting away his computer. They've been eager to meet the woman who calmed my daughter. Emma watched through the window as more figures appeared. At least 20 of them now, all dressed in dark, fancy clothes that looked like they belonged to a different time. But it was their eyes that made her stomach twist with fear. Every single one of them glowed with the same strange light she'd seen from Kale and Lyra. Amber, silver, deep red like fresh blood. They're like you, Emma said, her voice barely loud enough to hear. Vampires, Kale confirmed easily, as if he was just talking about the weather. The oldest and most loyal of my bloodline. Some have served my family for hundreds of years. Vampires. The word hit Emma like a strong push. Part of her had guessed, but hearing it confirmed made everything real in a way that terrified her. These weren't just dangerous people. They were hunters who fed on human blood. The car door opened and one of Kale's men motioned for her to get out. Emma's legs felt shaky as she stepped onto the black stone, Lyra immediately taking her hand. The moment her feet touched the ground, every single servant dropped into a very low bow. My lord, they spoke at the same time, their voices creating a strange sound that echoed off the estate's walls. Welcome home. Kale walked past them without looking, but Emma noticed how their glowing eyes followed his every move with something that looked like worship. He stopped at the entrance, a doorway easily 12 feet tall and carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Emma Rodriguez, his voice carried across the courtyard. Welcome to Ravensholt. The inside was even more amazing than the outside. The entrance hall went up 3 stories high, with a huge lamp made of what looked like black crystal casting moving shadows on the walls. Oil paintings of serious-looking people with those same silver eyes lined the hallways, and Emma realized she was looking at many generations of Kale's family. All of them had that same ageless, hunting beauty. The Draven bloodline, Kale said, noticing her staring. We've ruled this land for over 800 years. Territory. Everything within a 50-mile area belongs to me. Every human, every business, every breath of air. His smile was sharp. Including you now. They walked through hallways covered with large cloth pictures that showed hunting scenes, though Emma had the sickening feeling the animals in those pictures weren't real animals. Servants appeared and disappeared like ghosts, always bowing when they passed Kale, always watching Emma with curious, glowing eyes. Finally, they entered what looked like a library that belonged in a fancy old European castle. Shelves reaching the ceiling filled with ancient books surrounded a fireplace large enough to stand in. Kale motioned for Emma to sit in a leather chair that probably cost more than her car. Do you know why my daughter was in your diner tonight? Kale asked, sitting in the chair across from her. Lyra climbed onto Emma's lap without asking, curling up like a small chat. No. She was running from here, from me, from the safety I've spent years building around her. His silver eyes grew distant. 3 years ago, Lyra saw something that broke her mind. She hasn't spoken since, hasn't allowed anyone to touch her. She screams if anyone but me comes near her. Emma looked down at the little girl in her arms, who was now playing with the bubbles Emma had blown earlier in her pocket. What did she see? Her mother's murder. The words hit Emma like ice water. She held Lyra tighter, understanding now why the child carried such deep hurt. Lyra is not just my daughter, Kale continued, his voice growing colder. She is the heir to the Draven bloodline, a princess among vampires, and there are those who would use her to destroy everything I've built. That's why she ran. She sensed danger. Her vampire instincts are strong, even if her mind is broken. Kale leaned forward, his eyes burning into Emma's. But you calmed her. For the first time in 3 years, she trusts someone besides me. That makes you very important. Emma felt the trap closing around her. What do you want from me? You will stay here. You will care for Lyra. Comfort her. Help her heal. You will be whatever she needs you to be. Kale's voice carried the weight of a king's order. In return, you will live in luxury beyond your imagination. And if I refuse? Kale stood, his huge body casting long shadows in the fireplace light. When he spoke, his voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than any shout. You won't refuse, Emma, because you've already seen what Lyra becomes without you. A broken, terrified child lost in her own mind. And because deep down you know you have nowhere else to go. He moved toward the door, then paused. Your room is prepared. Lyra's chambers are connected to yours. The servants will provide anything you require. Wait, Emma called as he reached the doorway. What if I can't help her? What if I make things worse? Lord Kale Draven turned back one final time, and his smile was colder than winter's heart. Then pray you die quickly, Emma Rodriguez, because if you fail my daughter, if you betray the trust he's placed in you, you won't live long enough to regret it. The door closed behind him with the finality of a coffin lid, leaving Emma alone with a vampire princess and the growing realization that her simple life had just become a beautiful nightmare. 5 days passed like scenes from a dream Emma couldn't wake up from. Her room was larger than her entire apartment back home, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over gardens so perfectly kept they looked like paintings. The bed was carved from dark wood and covered in silk that probably cost more than she made in a year. But despite the luxury, Emma felt like a bird in a golden cage. Lyra never left her side. The little girl followed Emma everywhere with the loyalty of a shadow. Those silver eyes constantly watching, constantly trusting. She didn't speak, not a single word, but she communicated in ways that broke my heart and mended it at once. A gentle pull on Emma's hand when she wanted to go somewhere, a small finger pointing at something that caught her interest, the way she would curl up in Emma's lap during the long afternoons, finally calm enough to sleep. It was the bubbles that worked the magic. Emma had asked one of the servants, a stern-faced woman named Celeste, whose eyes glowed amber in the dark, for bubble solution and plastic wands. Celeste had looked at her as if she'd requested dragon's blood, but within an hour Emma had enough supplies to fill a toy store. The first time Lyra laughed was on the third day. They were in the estate's conservatory, a glass-roofed garden filled with flowers that bloomed in impossible colors. Emma sat cross-legged on the marble floor, blowing streams of bubbles that caught the afternoon sunlight and scattered them into tiny rainbows. Lyra chased them with the focused energy of a hunter. But when one particularly large bubble landed on her nose and popped with the softest sound, she giggled. The laugh was like silver bells, clear and musical and so full of joy that Emma's eyes filled with tears. For a moment, Lyra wasn't a scared vampire princess or a chess piece in some magical war. She was just a little girl playing with bubbles. Again, Lyra whispered, her first word in 3 years coming out soft as a breath. Please. Emma blew bubbles until her cheeks hurt and Lyra's dress was damp with burst soap films. The little girl spun and danced, her blonde hair catching the light as she chased the shiny spheres through the conservatory.
Her laughter echoed off the glass walls, a sound so beautiful that even the flowers seemed to turn toward it. What Emma didn't notice was the figure watching from the shadows of the doorway. Kale stood perfectly still, his usually serious face soft with something that looked almost like wonder. The sharp lines around his silver eyes had softened, and for just a moment, he looked less like a vampire lord and more like a father watching his daughter play. Emma caught a quick look at him when she turned to reach for more bubble solution, and the feeling on his face made her chest tight with unexpected emotion. But by the time she blinked, he was gone, leaving only the faint smell of winter forests and the feeling that she'd seen something intensely private. The nights were when Emma heard things she wasn't supposed to hear. Vampire servants didn't sleep, she'd learned. They moved through the estate's hallways after midnight, their soft voices carrying conversations they thought no human could understand. But sound traveled strangely in Raven's Halt, and Emma's room was positioned perfectly to catch whispers from the servants' area below. "The Crimson Court grows restless," she heard Celeste murmur to another servant on the 4th night. "Lord Matthias believes the girl's trauma makes her weak, easily hurt." "He's wrong," came the reply in a voice like grinding stone. "The young mistress carries the pure bloodline. In the right hands, she could be turned against her father." Emma pressed herself against the floor, trying hard to hear more. "The human complicates things," Celeste continued. "Already the child shows signs of healing. If she recovers fully, she won't live that long. None of them will." The other voice held the coldness of grave dirt. "Lord Matthias has been watching, waiting.
The human has made the young mistress easy to predict. They know where to find her now. Emma's blood turned to ice. They were talking about Lyra, about her. Someone was planning to use their bond against them. When Celeste asked soon, "The new moon is in 3 days. Darkness will be absolute, and Lord Kale will be at his weakest. The Crimson Court will strike." Then footsteps moved away, leaving Emma alone with the terrible knowledge that she had brought danger down on the one person she'd come to care about most. The next morning, she watched Lyra more carefully, noting details she'd missed before. How the little girl's fingers were always slightly cold, even in the warmest rooms. How her teeth were just a bit too sharp for a normal child. How she never seemed to eat regular food, though Celeste brought her strange mixtures that smelled of iron and herbs. Lyra was becoming more vampire with each passing day, her magical nature strengthening as her pain healed. And Emma was helping it happen, feeding the very power that made her so valuable to Kale's enemies. "Emma," Lyra's voice was still a whisper, but she spoke more now, single words and short phrases that felt like gifts. They were in Emma's room, bubble wands and solution bottles scattered across the silk bedding. "What is it, sweetheart? Are you going to leave?" Silver eyes, wide with worry, searched Emma's face. "Like Mama did?" Emma's heart broke. She pulled Lyra onto her lap, holding her close, breathing in the scent of moonlight and winter that clung to the little girl's hair. "No, baby, I'm not going anywhere." But even as she spoke the words, Emma could feel the weight of the danger pressing down on them. The Crimson Court, whoever they were, would come for Lyra, and when they did, Emma would be caught in the middle of a war she didn't understand, fighting enemies she couldn't hope to beat. She looked out the window at the darkening sky and realized that her presence at Ravensholt hadn't saved Lyra from danger. It had painted a target on both their backs. The little girl who trusted her completely, who was finally learning to laugh and speak again, was about to become a weapon in a magical fight that could destroy them all. The new moon was only 3 days away, and Emma had no idea how to protect the vampire princess who had become the daughter of her heart. The attack came at dawn on the second day. Emma suddenly woke up to the sound of glass shattering somewhere in the estate's lower levels. For a moment, she thought it might be wind from another storm, but then she heard something that made her blood freeze. Screaming. Not human screaming, but something far more terrible. The sound of hunters fighting to the death. Lyra was already sitting up in the next bed, her silver eyes wide with the same strong fear Emma had first seen in the diner. Her special senses had felt the danger before Emma's human ones even noticed it. "Emma," Lyra's voice was still a whisper, but she spoke more now, single words and short phrases that felt like gifts. They had come for me. More sounds reached them, running footsteps, doors breaking apart, and underneath it all, a sound like wet tearing that my mind refused to identify. The estate's lights flickered, then went out completely, leaving us in the gray half-light of early morning. I was out of bed in an instant, grabbing Lyra and pulling her toward the window. What I saw in the courtyard below made my stomach drop. Dark figures moved across the grounds with unnatural speed, their shapes blurring as they cut down Kale's servants. But these weren't the smooth, controlled movements I'd grown used to seeing from the Ravensholt vampires. These attackers moved like angry, crazy animals, all claws and fangs and mindless violence. "The Crimson Court! They've come for me!" The bedroom door burst open, ripped from its hinges like paper. A vampire Emma had never seen before stood in the doorway, tall and thin with eyes like burning coals and blood already staining his jacket. His gaze locked onto Lyra with clear hunger. "Princess," he hissed, his voice like scraping bone, "Lord Matthias sends his regards." Emma didn't think. She grabbed the nearest thing she could find, a heavy glass vase, and threw it at the vampire's head. It smashed against his skull with a satisfying crack, and while he stumbled, Emma scooped up Lyra and ran. The hallways were a mess. Bodies, or what they were left of, covered the fancy carpets. Celeste lay broken against a wall, her amber eyes dim and dead. Other servants Emma had come to know were scattered like broken dolls, their formal uniforms torn and bloody. "This way," Lyra whispered urgently, pulling Emma toward what looked like a solid wall. But when Lyra pressed her hand against a carved rose on the wooden paneling, a section of the wall swung inward.
showing a narrow passageway. Secret tunnels, Lyra explained as they squeezed inside. Papa showed me when I was little, for emergencies. The passage was barely wide enough for Emma's shoulders, and the darkness was total. She could hear Lyra's fast breathing ahead of her, could feel her trembling as sounds of battle echoed through the walls around them. Somewhere close by, something roared with unhuman rage, and the walls shook. They reached a small chamber carved from stone, probably used for storage hundreds of years ago. A thin crack in the wall let in a sliver of light from the main hallway beyond. Emma pressed herself against it, trying to see what was happening. Kale's remaining guards were making a final stand at the main staircase. I recognized Marcus, the serious vampire who had driven us from the diner, holding what looked like a silver sword. He moved with deadly accuracy, cutting down attackers with hundreds of years of skill behind each strike. But there were too many of them. "We need to keep quiet," Emma whispered to Lyra, who was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "Can you do that for me, baby girl?" Lyra nodded, but I could see the fear building in those silver eyes. The same blank panic that had swallowed her at the diner was threatening to return. Emma reached into her pocket and pulled out the small bottle of bubble solution she'd started carrying everywhere. She unscrewed the cap and dipped the wand, then blew gently. Bubbles floated through the small space, their surfaces catching what little light filtered through the crack in the stone walls. Lyra's breathing slowed as she watched them float and pop against the stone walls. Emma kept blowing, creating a small cloud of shiny balls that seemed to glow in the darkness.
Through the crack, Emma saw something that made her heart stop. Marcus was fighting 3 vampires at once, his sword flashing like silver lightning. But behind him, sneaking up the stairs with careful silence, was another figure Emma recognized. Victor, one of Kale's most trusted guards, someone who'd bowed to Kale with apparent loyalty every single day. Victor raised a curved dagger, aiming for the space between Marcus's shoulder blades. Emma wanted to scream a warning, but any sound would give away their hiding place. She could only watch in horror as Victor drove the blade deep into Marcus's back. The loyal guard's eyes widened in shock and a feeling of being betrayed before he fell to the floor. "Well done," said a voice like poisoned honey. A new vampire came down the stairs, tall and fancy with silver hair and eyes like fresh blood. "Lord Matthias will be so disappointed to learn of his guard's betrayal." Victor bowed deeply. "Lord Matthias, the princess is here somewhere. The human took her when the attack began." "Find them," Matthias commanded. "The girl's trauma has made her powerful but unstable, perfect for our purposes. And bring me the human's head. She's served her usefulness." Emma's blood turned to ice. The betrayal ran deeper than she'd thought. Victor had been giving information to the Crimson Court, probably for months. Every detail about Lyra's recovery, every weak spot in the estate's defenses. That's when the temperature in the hallway dropped 30 degrees in a single second. The attacking vampires froze, their heads turning toward the main entrance with looks of sudden, strong fear. Even Matthias took a step back, his confident attitude cracking. The front doors didn't open, they fell apart. Lord Kale Draven walked through the ruined entrance like an angel of revenge covered in shadows and winter wind. His fancy clothes were torn and bloody, his silver hair messy from battle, and his eyes burned like 2 suns that had exploded. Emma had never seen anything so beautiful or terrifying in her life. He moved through the attacking vampires like death itself, not fighting, killing. His bare hands tore through them as if they were made of paper, their old bodies crumbling to dust before they could even scream. Blood painted the walls in red curves, and the air filled with the sound of bones snapping like dry wood. In less than 30 seconds, a dozen of Matthias's vampires were nothing but ash on the marble floor. "You dare?" Kale's voice boomed with power that made the entire estate shake. "Attack my home? Threaten my daughter?" Matthias stood up straight, trying to regain his calm. "The girl belongs to the old bloodlines, Kale. Your protection of her breaks ancient law." Kale's hand closed around Matthias's throat, stopping his words. "You speak of ancient law. I am ancient law." But Victor chose that moment to run, slipping away toward a side passage while Kale was busy. Emma wanted to shout, to warn Kale about the traitor's escape. But Lyra chose that moment to let out a small sob of fear. It was barely loud enough to hear, but in the sudden silence following the battle, it was as good as a scream.
Kale's head snapped toward their hiding place, his burning eyes finding the crack in the wall. For a moment that felt like forever, father and daughter stared at each other through the stone barrier. When Kale finally spoke, his voice was soft as falling snow and twice as cold. "Come out, Emma. Both of you. It's over." Emma pushed open the hidden door, Lyra holding tight to her leg as they stepped into the blood-soaked hallway. Kale stood among the destruction like a dark king looking over his beaten land. Matthias's dead body lay broken at his feet. This was what he truly was, Emma realized with perfect clarity. Not the calm, fancy gentleman or the loving father, but this, a creature of such great power that even other vampires feared him. When those burning silver eyes fixed on her face, Emma saw her own life's end reflected there. And for the first time since arriving at Raven's Halt, she truly understood what it meant to be human in a world of monsters. The estate fell silent except for the soft fall of ash settling on marble floors. Kale stood among the destruction, his chest going up and down with breaths that weren't needed but that showed his barely controlled anger. Blood, not his own, stained his hands and clothes, and his silver eyes still burned with that terrifying inner fire that had turned a dozen old vampires to dust. "Papa!" Lyra's voice was barely a whisper, but it seemed to cut through Kale's fury like a knife through silk. The burning in his eyes dimmed, replaced by something much gentler as he looked at his daughter. "I'm here, little star. You're safe now." But Emma could see the lie in the tight way his shoulders were held, the way his hands trembled slightly as he knelt to hug Lyra. This attack had scared him more than he wanted to admit. The Crimson Court had gotten past his guards, killed his servants, turned his own guard against him. Nothing was safe anymore. "Victor escaped," Emma said quietly, watching Kale's face carefully. "I saw him run while you were fighting Matthias." Kale's jaw tightened, the muscle moving with barely controlled violence. "I know." 2 words, but they carried the promise of death within them. He stood and began giving orders to the surviving servants who came out from their hiding places like ghosts. "Seal all entrances except the main gate. Double the blood ward protections. Send word to the outer territories. I want every vampire in my service back at Raven's Halt within the hour." Emma watched him change back into the cold, planning lord she'd first met, all signs of the vulnerable father disappearing behind layers of icy control. It should have made her feel better, but instead it made her stomach twist with unease. "Emma," his voice cut through her thoughts, "you will return to your chambers immediately. Do not leave them for any reason. Do not open the door for anyone except me." "But this is not a request." His silver eyes allowed no argument. "You are the only person my daughter trusts. That makes you very important, but it also makes you a target. I will not risk your safety." Emma wanted to argue, but the bodies scattered around them made his point clear. She was human, fragile, completely unprotected against creatures who could tear her apart easily. She nodded unwillingly, taking Lyra's hand. But as they climbed the stairs toward the bedroom area, Emma's unease grew. Something felt wrong, not finished. Victor hadn't just escaped, he'd escaped for a reason. The attack on Raven's Halt had been too organized, too well-informed to be over with Matthias's death. 2 hours later, her feelings proved correct. Emma had managed to get Lyra to sleep, the little girl tired from fear and the emotional stress of the morning's violence. But sleep avoided Emma. She walked the room like a caged animal, every shadow seeming to hide threats, every sound making her jump. That's when she heard voices in the hallway outside. Familiar voices, speaking in quiet, urgent tones. "Must move tonight, while Lord Kale's defenses are getting sorted out." Emma pressed herself against the door, trying hard to listen. The voice was definitely Victor's, though she couldn't tell who his friend was. "The girl will be vulnerable during the move to the new safe house. That's our chance." Emma's blood turned to ice. New safe house? Kale hadn't mentioned moving Lyra anywhere. "What about the human?" another voice asked, one Emma didn't recognize. "She's not needed now. The princess's attachment to her served its purpose, made her easy to predict. Once we have the girl, the human dies." Emma's hands shook as she eased the door open just enough to peer through the crack. Victor stood in the hallway with 2 vampires she'd never seen before.
members of the Crimson Court who'd somehow snuck into the estate during the chaos. Lord Darius wants the princess delivered to the sanctum by midnight. The ritual requires the new moon, and we have only one chance to complete the binding ritual. Binding. The word sent terror shooting through her veins. They weren't just planning to kidnap Lyra. They were going to use her for something far worse. She had to warn Kale. She eased the door shut and turned toward the connecting chamber where Lyra slept, but the little girl's bed was empty. Looking for something? Victor's voice came from behind her. Cold as winter death? Emma spun around to find him standing in the doorway, holding Lyra's unconscious body in his arms. The little girl's silver hair hung limp, and her pale face was slack with unnatural sleep. "What did you do to her?" Emma lunged forward, but Victor's free hand caught her throat and lifted her off the ground with inhuman strength. "A mild sleeping drug. She'll sleep for hours, long enough for us to complete our business." His grip tightened, cutting off her air supply.
Emma clawed at his hand, spots dancing at the edges of her vision. "Kale will kill you." "Lord Kale will never find us. By the time he realizes what's happened, the princess will be bound to Lord Darius's will, and the Draven bloodline will serve the true vampire nobility." Victor's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Your part in this little play is over, human." The last thing Emma saw before darkness claimed her was Lyra's peaceful face and the knowledge that she'd failed to protect the child who'd become her whole world. When she woke, the room was destroyed. Furniture lay scattered and broken. Deep claw marks scored the walls, and the very air seemed to shake with leftover anger. Kale stood in the center of the destruction, his back to her, his whole body trembling with rage so pure it was almost visible. "How long?" Emma croaked, her throat raw from Victor's grip. "For hours." Kale's voice was barely human, made rough by things that had grown longer in his fury. "For hours since they took my daughter." Emma struggled to sit up, ignoring the throbbing pain in her head. "I heard them talking. They mentioned a sanctum, a ritual that requires the new moon. Someone named Lord Darius." Kale spun around and Emma gasped at what she saw. His eyes burned like two suns, his face was pale as marble, and when he spoke, his fangs flashed like silver daggers. "Darius Blackthorn, I should have known." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. "He seeks to bind Lyra's power to his own bloodline, make her a weapon against me. We have to stop him." "We?" Kale's laugh held no humor. "You are human, Emma. Fragile, easily broken. You will remain here where—" "No!" Emma forced herself to stand, meeting his burning gaze with her own. "Lyra trusts me. If she wakes up in a place full of strangers, she'll panic. She'll fight them. You know I'm right." Kale's expression shifted, planning taking over some of the rage. "The ritual requires her cooperation, willing or not. If she's traumatized, fighting, she won't trust anyone else," Emma insisted. "You've seen how she is with other people. She needs me there, Kale. You need me there." For a long moment they stared at each other, the ancient vampire lord and the human waitress who'd stumbled into his world. Finally, Kale nodded once, sharp and decided. "Very well, but you follow my orders without question." His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than any shout. "Stay close to me, Emma Rodriguez. One wrong move, one moment of doubt, and you will die alongside my enemies." Emma met his gaze without backing down. "I understand. Do you?" Kale stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flash of gold in his silver eyes. "Because where we're going, mercy is a luxury neither of us can afford. The sanctum of shadows is sacred ground to the old bloodlines. Even I will be tested there." Emma thought of Lyra's laugh, of silver eyes full of trust and wonder, of small hands reaching for bubbles in a world of darkness. "Then we'd better not fail," she said. Kale's smile was sharp as winter and twice as cold. "Indeed, because failure means more than death, Emma. It means watching my daughter become a monster." The new moon was rising, and somewhere in the darkness, a vampire princess slept in the hands of her enemies. Time was running out.
The sanctum of shadows rose from the mist like a monument to forgotten gods. The ancient cathedral had once been a place of worship, but hundreds of years of vampire control had twisted it into something darker. Gothic spires clawed at the moonless sky, and stone figures perched along the roofline seemed to move in Emma's side vision. Stained glass windows, cracked and blackened with age, showed scenes of battles between winged figures and creatures that looked strangely familiar. "Stay behind me," Kale whispered as they approached the massive oak doors. "Do not engage anyone directly. Your only goal is to reach Lyra." Emma nodded, her heart beating hard against her ribs. The battle of bubble solution in her pocket felt both silly and essential, her only weapon against the nightmare they were walking into. The door stood slightly open, revealing glimpses of flickering candlelight within. Kale paused, his silver eyes looking at the shadows, every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. "They're expecting us," he said, his voice barely loud enough to hear. "At least 24 vampires, maybe more, very old ones. Can you handle that many?" Kale's smile was sharp as a blade. "You're about to find out what 8 centuries of existence has taught me about survival." They slipped through the doors into a scene from a medieval picture of hell. The cathedral's main room stretched before them, lined with stone pillars that supported a high, arched ceiling, lost in shadow. Candles flickered from every surface, casting moving light across faces that belonged in nightmares. Vampires filled the space, some in modern clothing, others dressed like they'd stepped from different centuries entirely. Their eyes glowed like colored gems in the darkness, amber, silver, deep crimson, pale gold. At the altar, Lord Darius Blackthorn waited. He was tall and fancy, with silver hair that shone like moonlight, and eyes the color of fresh blood. Ancient power flowed from him like heat from a furnace. At his feet, Lyra lay unconscious on a stone slab, her small form almost lost among the ritual tools surrounding her. "Lord Kale Draven," Darius called out, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "How gracious of you to join our ceremony. You arrived just in time to witness your daughter's rebirth." Emma's eyes found Victor standing beside the altar, his face smug with expected victory. The traitor wore ceremonial robes now, clearly having become more important to Darius. "Release her," Kale's voice carried the weight of a king's order. "Your quarrel is with me." "My quarrel is with the weakness you show." He motioned to the vampires gathered there. "For too long our kind has hidden in shadows, content to feed on scraps while humans multiply like pests. Your daughter's power, bound to my will usher in a new age." Kale stepped forward and Emma felt the temperature drop quickly. "You want a new age? Let me show you one." What happened next broke every rule Emma thought she knew about the laws of nature. Kale moved like darkness given a body, faster than the eye could follow. One moment he stood beside Emma, the next he was among the vampires like a wolf in a flock of sheep. His hands became claws that tore through old flesh as if it were paper. Vampires who'd survived for hundreds of years crumbled to dust before they could even scream. Blood painted the cathedral's walls in red curves. The sound of tearing flesh and snapping bones filled the air, broken by Kale's inhuman roars of fury. He moved through his enemies like a natural disaster, unstoppable and terrifying. Emma used the confusion to her advantage. While every eye was fixed on the terrible scene, she slipped along the wall toward the altar. Stone pillars provided cover as she crept closer to where Lyra lay still. The little girl's face was pale as marble, her breathing so shallow it was barely visible. A vampire noticed her movement and lunged, but Kale appeared like a shadow, his hand closing around the attacker's throat. The ancient creature's head separated from his shoulders with a wet sound that made Emma's stomach turn. "Go," Kale snarled, his eyes burning like twin suns. "Get her out of here." Emma reached the altar just as Lyra's silver eyes fluttered open. The little girl's gaze was unfocused, cloudy from whatever drugs they'd given her. But when she saw her face, recognition appeared. "Emma?" Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm scared." "I know, baby girl. I'm here." Emma's fingers worked at the leather straps tying Lyra to the stone slab. "Everything is going to be okay." But even as she spoke, Emma could see the terror building in Lyra's eyes. The sounds of battle filled the cathedral, screams, roars, the wet sound of bodies being torn apart. It was too much for a child who'd already witnessed her mother's murder. Lyra's breathing grew fast and shallow. Her small body began to shake, and Emma recognized the signs of an approaching panic attack. Emma reached into her pocket and pulled out the bubble solution. "Look at me, sweetheart," she whispered, unscrewing the cap with trembling fingers. "Just at me." She dipped the wand and blew gently. Bubbles rose into the air, catching the candlelight and making it look like something magical.
They floated around Lyra's face like tiny planets, their surfaces shimmering with rainbow colors that seemed to glow against the cathedral's darkness. "Pretty," Lyra breathed, her panic fading as she reached out to touch the floating spheres. Emma kept blowing bubbles, creating a cloud of shimmering beauty in the middle of the hellish battle. Lyra's breathing calmed, her silver eyes focusing on the gentle dance of soap and light rather than the violence around them. "That's my girl," Emma whispered, finally freeing the last strap. "Can you walk?" Lyra nodded, sitting up on the stone altar. Emma lifted her down, keeping the bubble wand ready to create more distractions if needed. That's when Victor appeared behind them. "Touching," the traitor sneered, his formal clothes now splattered with blood. The human and her pet tricks. He raised a curved dagger, its blade shining in the candlelight. "Lord Darius may be busy, but your usefulness has ended." The blade went down toward Emma's back, but never found its target. Kale appeared between them like a ghost made of shadow and fury. His hand caught Victor's wrist with a sound like breaking bones, stopping the dagger inches from Emma's spine. "Victor Stroberg." Kale's voice was soft as falling snow and infinitely more deadly. "My most trusted guard. The vampire I welcomed into my family." Victor's face went white as fresh snow. "My lord, I can explain." "Explain?" Kale's grip tightened, and Victor screamed as his wrist shattered. "Explain how you sold my daughter to our enemies. Explain how you betrayed 800 years of loyalty for Darius's promises." The dagger clattered to the floor. Kale's other hand closed around Victor's throat, lifting him off the ground with easy strength. "There is no explanation," Kale whispered. "There is only justice." Victor's body crumbled to ash, scattering in the cathedral's cold air like gray snow. Behind them, Lord Darius's voice cut through the sudden silence. "Impressive, old friend, but you're too late." Emma turned to see Darius standing over a circle carved into the stone floor, his hands glowing with dark energy. The ritual wasn't over. It had only just begun. "The new moon reaches its peak," Darius continued, his red eyes fixed on Lyra. "With or without ceremony, the binding will be complete. Your daughter's power will be mine." Dark energy began to spiral toward Lyra, trying to wrap around her small body like chains made of shadow. But as the first threads touched her skin, something unexpected happened. Lyra looked at Emma, her silver eyes bright with trust and love, and smiled. "Bubbles," she said clearly. "More bubbles, please." And in that moment, Emma understood. The binding required fear, trauma, the very darkness that had consumed Lyra for 3 years. But Emma had given her something else. Hope, joy, the simple magic of soap spheres floating in candlelight. Light conquered darkness, and Darius's spell shattered like glass. The spell's destruction sent shockwaves through the cathedral that brought down hundreds of years-old stones. Darius staggered backward, his red eyes wide with disbelief as dark energy disappeared around him like smoke. "Impossible," he breathed. "The binding cannot be broken by mortal means." Kale stepped forward, his silver eyes blazing with victory and deadly intent. You underestimated the power of something you've never known, Darius. Love. Emma held Lyra close as the little girl giggled at the soap bubbles still floating around them, completely unaware of the magical forces that had just tried to claim her. The contrast was amazing. Innocence and joy existing in the heart of an ancient place of darkness. "This isn't over, Draven," Darius snarled, but his voice held the empty sound of defeat. "The old bloodlines will never accept your human pet." Kale moved faster than Emma's eyes could follow. One moment, Darius was standing at the altar. The next, he was nothing but ash settling on the cathedral floor. The Vampire King's fury had finally found its target. Silence fell over the ruined cathedral like a heavy blanket. The surviving members of the Crimson Court had fled into the night, leaving only Kale's loyal vampires standing among the wreckage. Emma realized that more fighters had arrived during the battle. Dozens of vampires boring the Draven crest, their eyes glowing with respect and fierce loyalty as they looked at their lord. "My lord," one of them said, bowing deeply, "the estate is secure. All traitors have been eliminated." Kale nodded, his gaze finding Emma and Lyra. The burning fury was fading from his silver eyes, replaced with something softer, but no less intense. "Good. See to the wounded." Emma carried Lyra toward the cathedral's entrance, desperate to escape the scent of blood and ash that filled the air. Her legs felt weak with tiredness and leftover fear, but Lyra's warm weight in her arms kept her moving forward. The night air was cool and clean after the stuffiness of the cathedral. Emma sank onto the stone steps, finally allowing herself to breathe properly. Lyra curled against her chest, one small hand still holding the bubble wand. "Emma," the little girl whispered sleepily, "are we going home now?" "Home?" The word home hit Emma like a strong push. Where was home for her now? Her tiny apartment above the used bookstore? The late-night shifts at Mel's Diner? That life felt like something from another century, something that had happened to a different person entirely. "Yes, baby girl," Emma said softly, stroking Lyra's blonde hair. "We're going home." Kale emerged from the cathedral, his huge body silhouetted against the flickering candlelight within. Blood still stained his clothes, and his hair was messy from battle, but he moved with the controlled grace Emma had come to recognize. Behind him, his followers streamed out into the night, vampires who had served the Draven bloodline for decades or centuries. They formed a half-circle around the cathedral steps, their glowing eyes fixed on Kale with the devotion usually reserved for gods or kings. Emma suddenly felt very small and very human in their presence. Kale descended the steps slowly, his silver gaze never leaving Emma's face. When he reached them, he knelt beside her, his cold fingers gently touching Lyra's cheek. The little girl smiled in her half-sleep, unconsciously leaning into her father's touch. "You saved her," he said quietly. "You saved us both." Emma met his eyes, seeing emotions there she couldn't name. She saved herself. The bubbles just reminded her that there's still beauty in the world. Kale's hand moved to cup Emma's face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with surprising tenderness. "You gave her that. You gave her hope when I had none left to offer." The assembled vampires watched in complete silence, but Emma could feel the weight of their attention like a physical presence. These old creatures were seeing something they probably never saw before. Their lord showing such gentleness, such human feeling. Kale stood, turning to face his followers. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of 8 centuries of rule, but underneath it was something Emma had never heard from him before. Genuine warmth. "Tonight you have seen courage that puts our immortal strength to shame. This woman risked everything to protect what matters most to me.
She asked for nothing in return, expected no reward. Yet she stood against forces that would terrify warriors 1,000 years her senior. Emma's cheeks burned as dozens of glowing eyes turned to her with something that looked suspiciously like respect. From this night forward, Kale continued, his voice growing stronger. Emma Rodriguez is under my protection. She is no longer merely human. She is family. She is Draven. The announcement sent shockwaves through the gathered vampires, but none dared to disagree. Emma felt the world change around her, understanding with perfect clarity that Kale wasn't just thanking her. He was claiming her, tying her to his world and his bloodline in ways that went far deeper than marriage or adoption. My lord, Emma started to protest, but Kale's silver eyes silenced her. The choice is yours, he said softly, his voice meant for her alone. You can return to your old life, and I will ensure you're never bothered by our kind again. Or you can stay. Help me raise my daughter. Stand beside me as we rebuild what was destroyed tonight. His expression grew gentle in a way that made her chest tight. I won't lie to you, Emma. This world is dangerous. There will be other enemies,
But there will also be family, purpose, and power beyond anything you've ever imagined. Emma looked down at Lyra, who had fallen completely asleep in her arms, the bubble wand still held in her small fist. The little girl's face was peaceful for the first time since Emma had known her, free from the nightmares that had haunted her for 3 years. Then she looked up at Kale, seeing past the vampire lord to the father who had nearly lost everything tonight, the man who had trusted her with his most precious treasure and watched her prove worthy of that trust. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn, painting the cathedral's Gothic spires in shades of gold and rose. Somewhere in the distance, a bird began to sing. Emma Rodriguez had been a waitress 12 hours ago. She'd served coffee to truckers and counted tips in a diner that smelled of grease and broken dreams. That woman felt like a stranger. Now? I'll stay, she said, her voice steady despite the huge importance of the decision. We'll stay. Kale's smile was like sunrise after an endless night, beautiful, rare, and worth every moment of darkness that had come before. As dawn broke over the ancient cathedral, Emma realized she was no longer just a waitress who had stumbled into a vampire's world. She was the woman who had blown bubbles in the darkness, and in doing so, had softened the heart of a vampire king himself. Some love stories begin with a first look across a crowded room. This one began with soap bubbles and a little girl's tears, and would be written in moonlight and shadow for all the centuries to come.